Welcome back. Now, gender discrimination remains one of the most persistent challenges in Nigerian society. Women continue to face, different barriers that limit their rights, opportunities, and their dignity. Well, today we are exploring this issue with the communications officer of Adaojiriver Optimal Communications, Anwuleka Iwobash, talking on deconstructing gender discrimination from Adaojiriver Initiative. You're welcome. Good morning.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Good morning. Lovely to be here.
Yes. So let's talk about gender discrimination.
Yes.
Personally, how would you define gender discrimination, practically in, looking at the places you've been to and the work you've done so far?
Well, from I think my experience, personally and professionally hasn't been very different. I think gender discrimination essentially refers to treating someone differently and negatively as well. There is that inherent negative or negativity in the treatment of somebody solely on account of their gender. So I think that, essentially defines gender discrimination, where someone is treated differently, and that differently means poorly. And the reason is that the person is either female or male. So, yeah.
All right. Now, what would you say are most of the barriers that the female genders are facing when it comes to discrimination in Nigeria?
In Nigeria. Nigeria gives you a broader spectrum to, explore or examine the challenges or the barriers that women face, because, across culture, there is first and foremost the cultural barrier, which differs significantly, but also has its own, similarities across the ethnic groups or societies that make up Nigeria. So there is clearly that cultural barrier where, thanks to negative or regressive cultural norms, you find that women occupy the lesser position in quote in society, where male children are fundamentally valued or preferred, to their female counterparts, and in a society where having a male child consolidates your presence or your right as a woman, as a wife in a home. Automatically it tells you the place of woman in that society, because you can have as many female children as until you have a son, you more or less don't have a place. And for certain communities, it's only a matter of time before you're replaced with someone that can birth a son. So when you have that arrangement, that is a primary challenge that women face, because when you're born into a society that considers you less than your counterpart on account of your sex or account of your gender, I think that's the greatest challenge, and everything else just follows from that. And from that, you have the economic barrier that women or girls face in society. And I think that in many ways that also comes or stems from the culture that I mentioned, the norms that people uphold, in their cultural spaces or their traditional belief systems. And one of that is, for example, we're still talking about, the inheritance law, despite the rulings on it, despite the fact that, the Nigerian law has, stated clearly that, women are entitled to inheritance, right? But we still have in implementation, it's an entirely different issue, because at the rural areas, for instance, it will not take the government or the Ministry of Gender to come and implement it. It will take people, it will take the Council of Traditional Rulers, it will take individuals, families themselves, and where you still have that perception that the woman or the girl is less than the man, and where you still have that system that inheritance is something that is supposed to be for the men, you have that, you see that women are automatically disenfranchised economically, because land is an economic asset. It's a question of economy, and where women, for instance, are not entitled to land in certain communities, despite the inheritance law, right, you find out that they are already dealing with that challenge. For example, in the rural areas, as I mentioned, where maybe agriculture, farming is, the mainstay, the primary means of production and earning a living. When you don't have that land, what are you going to do? That's the beginning of, your problem. And at least if you can farm, maybe you can expand or go into other, areas of businesses. But when you're disenfranchised from that, land inheritance, for instance, that's like the beginning of your problem. There is also, when you're also talking about the cultural barriers, you're also looking at religious barriers, because some, whether it's Christianity or Islamic religion, or even, traditional religion, as they vary across cultures here, there are still some areas of, these systems that project women as maybe being inferior to the men, or at least in the interpretation of, the teachings or tenets of these religious groups. So you still find that women battle with asserting their worth, even in, religious circles. So I think that the challenges or the barriers that we face are so multifaceted. You find it literally in, even educationally as well. We still have some, I was speaking with some girls, at Adaojiriver, when we commemorated the International Day of the Girl Child, and some of the girl, students that we had join us on the studio were sharing their experiences. Some of them said that they come from homes where their parents, their fathers, are already telling them that they know that university is not for them. So you may still think that, oh, these things are no longer happening, that education has become something that is open to everyone, and that maybe more girls are in school, but there are still people battling with that, cultural norm or idea that education, there is a limit to, the education that a woman can get, maybe basic education, post-primary, but it doesn't go beyond that. So that's a challenge. And when you can't compete at an advantage, when the playground is not level, when boys have access to certain resources or amenities and you don't, on account of, I don't think there's any bigger, barrier than that. So, yeah.
Now, you've mentioned quite a number of barriers already. Now, I would like to ask you, how do you engage with communities, where these cultures are deeply enshrined in their day-to-day lives without being seen as a threat to them or to their identity? How do you go about that in Adaojiriver?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and that's also something that I will also admit, as you engage with different communities, you also find your language, you find your pattern of approaching without coming off as a threat, as you have said. And in our experience, in Adaojiriver, very often communities first perceive you as a threat, because you're coming to teach them something that maybe doesn't even align with their value system or their, traditional or cultural beliefs. And our people say that, right? So when things are not standing well in the society that you enter, when women are being marginalized, very often it's to the advantage of the men, or to the advantage of, some segment of that society, right? It takes one person to oppress another or to marginalize another. So you can't expect them to be all smiles and all welcoming, accepting of what you're bringing to them. So what we do is to speak to the women folk first, because since our interest is in leveling the playground, championing actions against sexual and gender-based violence in these communities, or even amplifying the work that other civil society organizations are doing in the area, we work with the women because they are our primary, targets. They are the ones who wear the shoes and know where it pinches. So when we have, in every society, you will always find those who are open, who are more progressive than the others, who are more open-minded. And if you're able to convert those ones, right, you have your foot soldiers. You have people who now do the talking for you, who do the ministration or the evangelism, because they have seen, your vision for them. They trust that you want the best for them. And you have also been able to make their lives better, maybe by helping, them to reclaim something that, they were denied in their society, helping them to get access to justice when, they've been abused or marginalized in any way. So when they taste the dividend of that democracy, in quotes, automatically you have converts that are willing to preach the word, that are willing to go out there and, to convert more people or to spread the word in such a way that those within their society, will hearken to the call. Yeah.
All right, now let's talk about the laws. Do you think that the existing laws like the VAP law or the VAP Act is actually effective enough in addressing these gender-based issues? And why do you think that implementation in Nigeria is usually hard?
So yes, I think the first question is the VAP law. I would say that the VAP law is one of the most effective laws, that we've that has been, passed in the maybe history of Nigeria's, legislature, because the 2015 review amendment has it's so holistic. It left no stone unturned, as they say, in terms of addressing what constitutes sexual and gender-based violence, because we've gone from that narrow definition of violence or rape, for instance, to mean a case of penetration, for example. It now broadened the definition so much that you even have it that inserting any objects, finger, whatever it is, a cup, anything, in any orifice, any hole, ear, nose, mouth, organ, whatever it is, without the consent of the person constitutes, abuse. So when you have that, you find that a lot of the job has been done, because for the longest time, some people evade the law or go scot-free, because, they could say, for instance, in the case of an abuse, there was no penetration. Meanwhile, someone has been defiled, someone has been abused, someone has been, someone's right or dignity has been taken away without the person's consent, right? But with that expansion, with the amendments that we have, with the VAP law, I think it really covers every possible area of sexual and gender-based violence, and you really can go scot-free, these days. But as you've also said, on the other side of it, there is the implementation. And when you mention that, you find that a number of agencies come to the fore, right? There is the Sexual Rescue Resource Center, the SACS, for instance, as an agency that is saddled more or less with helping implement this, right? You're talking about NAPTIP, at the federal level, and even the state, Department of NAPTIP. You're also talking about the civil society organization, right? Ministry of Gender, Ministry of Women's Affairs, and the Ministry of Justice, of course. So you find that across these levels of agencies, ministries, departments, whatever, at the heart of it is human beings doing the work, right? And take, for instance, in a case where a prominent person, because these are some of the issues that get in the way of administering justice, right? Where you have the elites, for example, faulted in one or two cases of sexual and gender-based violence, right? Very often, because the way Nigeria, has been working for the longest time, where those in power evade the law, right? You find out that what is being said, what the law stipulates, is no longer what is, being implemented when it comes to when the chips are down, for instance. We're still talking about the issue of Ochaya, for instance, which, resurfaced in the news, because why is it that 3 years after this young girl was, killed or died due to an infection that she got from having been abused for years under the house of their the family that took her and the people why is it that 3 years after we've not gotten justice? The case was just struck out like that, and the woman only got 5 months for aiding and abetting. Like, how is it? And nobody is talking about it. So the law has done what it has done. The legislature have done their work. They have, put this together. We now come to the judiciary. How are you following up with cases that, come to your desk? How are you following up with, administering? So what I'm saying is that it takes more than laws to make these things happen, to really implement them. There are many parts or, segments of society that comes into play and have their job to do. So that's why I said at the heart of it too, they're human beings. So you, whether you're in the Ministry of Justice or Ministry of, Gender, Women's Affairs, whether you're a civil service, civil society organization, wherever it is that you are, and you have a role to play, because we all have a role to play ultimately, right? How are you getting in the way of justice because of who is involved, or because of what you stand to lose when you really put your feet down on these things? So
that's a very good question. Now I want you to speak on something. Earlier on you spoke about education and how some families still don't see their girls going further. And there is this idea that with the rise of education and a lot of women getting to the levels of professors and doctors and being very well, highly educated, that this gender discrimination is no longer as prominent as it, that idea is still there, that women have gotten that liberation of some sort. Now, from your experience, would you say that this advancement has helped shield women significantly, or would you say that we are still having the issue of culture and all these biases still going on?
I think it's a yes and no question, because significantly, right? Indeed, there's been, significant progress, more or less, when it comes to, education and, girl-child education. I mean, you can't compare statistics of, girl children in school to, say, 2 decades ago, right? Or even more. And across the world, it has also been so, because with the United Nations, for instance, prioritizing gender equality, gender equity, through the SDG goal and all of that, and through its departments also, whether in terms of grants to Africa or to regions around the world, there are just a lot of groups, individual organizations, international communities are being more intentional about increasing girl-child education, right? Bridging the gap in girl and boy child education. So all these things come together to really increase the number of girls in school, number of girls attaining education. And also, as people go through, as people benefit from these laws, these changes in the way society works, they don't need a soothsayer to tell them to advocate for the same thing. So I'm saying in summary that yes, you could say that there's been some progress or some increase in that. However, I think we should also go beyond wanting to change the status quo from maybe 5% to 20 to 30%. We could aspire to more, 80%, 90, even 100%. And I think it's possible, right? Because what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If we still have in Enugu, in Metropolis, for instance, if we still have girls who say that their parents are already reminding them that, after secondary school, Otilo, and, the rest of education belongs to it. So I think that, is call for concern. It means that we still have a long way to go in, changing the norm. We still have a long way to go in making people, individuals, communities understand the importance of education for the girl child. So yes, there's been some progress, but we still have a lot of work to do.
All right, before we go now, how would you assess the representation of women in politics, in business, in governance, and how do we eradicate this discrimination?
I don't think anyone would assess the participation of women in politics differently, because what we still, the numbers we have, they're abysmally poor, right? Women's representation in politics it's a sad story, quite frankly. And in fact, I'm reminded of this book by Aisha Osori, who ran for office in Abuja Municipal. She wrote, "Love does not win elections" or something. "Love does not earn you votes." I don't remember the topic now, So women are clearly not well represented in politics. It's not a new fact. It's not news to anyone, right? But I think that the issues that we've looked at, or at least some of the issues that we've looked at, so far, shows you why this is so. So you have to treat you don't treat the symptoms, because the symptom of it is that women are not adequately represented in politics, but you have the root causes, which is what I think we should focus on. So first off is, how are women who are in politics perceived, right? There is that issue of dealing with with shaming. For instance, women's participation in politics comes with a lot of shaming. You're questioned, for your worth, your morality, your being, the yardsticks for men's engagement in politics and for women, very different. The standards are so, different. And with a situation like that, how many people want to put themselves in the arena? Yeah, so there is that also. There is also the question of the economy of politics. Because to run for office today is not a child's play. You need a lot of money. How many women have, what it takes to deal with that? And so if we're also looking at increasing women's representation in politics, we should also be intentional about increasing their, maybe their economic strength, opening up jobs to women. I'm not saying that women should be given jobs on account of, just being women. But I also think that organizations should be more intentional about having women represented, in key positions. So that way you're increasing their economic strength to, run for office or to deal with the financial demands of politics. And there is also, of course, the cultural, side to it, which is that some cultures, some religious, organizations don't even think that women should participate at all in politics, So there's a long way to go in looking at how or addressing why the status quo is so, which is that women are not adequately represented here.
All right, I think that's a wrap.
Right.
A very big thank you to you, Angolika Iwoba.
Thank you too. Thank you
for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, now over to you, Uche.
Well, that concludes the conversations this morning from our end for now. And we look forward to you staying with us as we'll be joining our Abuja studios. We're bringing you a conversation that was had about the presidential pardon. Do stay with us. And I am Uchenna Chimdi Olwoha.
And I am Lilian Wali. Have a great watch.
We are local.
International communities observing
Why the main market is in chaos. People are...
We are national.
Those in support of this motion as amended, say aye. Aye.
We have taken the view by default.
We are international.
Israeli airstrikes.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment.
Signature TV.